Part 6 of The Whistling Monsters by B. Wallis. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Part 6. As Vance, with nausea vanished and pain-stiffened muscles abruptly supple, wheeled to scan the cliff, in that fraction of a second he glimpsed the ghastly welter of weird things awake to vigorous movement and come in a solid mass through a swath of foam straight for the beach at their feet. Noiseless, swift, and direct, there could be no doubt of their deadly intention. Then came the whir and hiss of heavy missiles as Deegan desperately sought to stay their advance for but a few fateful seconds. With eager, searching eye, Vance scanned the naked wall in which the canyon ended. In an instant, he grasped the fact that the heights here were not entirely hopeless, for everywhere lay great seams, gaping cavities, and projecting ledges, where the dying throes of some titanic convulsion had plucked asunder this vast chasm. Behind the veil of falling spray loomed the dark blur of a huge rent that swept upward from the quiet pool until a sharp turn of the canyon, obviously some shallow offshoot and cul-de-sac, hid its higher flight. Steep it certainly was, but not impassable, and so deep and high-roofed a fissure that one within need hardly stoop as he clambered. Still higher, the bluffs were badly shattered, and the whole cliff face fell back in a series of vast irregular steps, whose every rung would likely harbor a miniature plateau where a man could rest in perfect safety. Yet it was entirely a gamble. Ascent might become impossible at a score of points, but they were desperate men, and instantly his mind was made up. "Listen, Deegan," he cried quickly. "It's just a bare chance. There's a crack behind the fall, big enough to stand in. Goes way up, lots of foothold above. Looks as if we might make it. What do you say? It's a chance." "Sure." Like a whip crack came the voice of Deegan. "Quick! Sling the dope! These blasted things are landing!" he gasped, between the delivery of a storm of missiles. "Hug the bluff to the end, then jump for the pool. Clear through the fall. Lower into the crack this side. Say when," cried Vance. "All set. Go ahead." And as he shouted, he whirled around, and brushing the cliff face, tore madly to the canyon end. And in that second, the hidden, swarming life of that dreadful place forsook concealment and came hurtling from a score of gaping fissures and deep shelves through the heavy, stagnant air. Dark masses of inconceivable frightfulness of outline passed above the racing men and landed splashing in the pool at its brink or thudded horribly on the rubble beach. In a moment, both the pool and the beach behind them were seething with a solid mass of hideous, writhing life. Yet, as if their trussed, helpless prey had earlier drawn the things to an invisible migration, but an odd one or two dropped abreast of them, and the bulk were concentrated many paces in the rear, a mischance that they instantly sought to remedy. On they came in a crested rushing wave of lashing and fighting tentacles, striving to clamber in expedite advance upon one another's bodies. But now the two men were abreast the fall, and without a second's hesitation had wildly leapt across the rubble and hurled themselves clear through the liquid veil. Emerging from the green depths, they had but to stretch forth a hand to grip the upward-sloping shelf. A scramble, and both stood safe upon it, in the twilight of the space held void and dry by the roof above. To their relief, the shelf proved wide and none too steep for ascent, though greasy with slime and oily weed. The thought of that frightful onrushing wave of malignant monsters spurred their muscles to the utmost limit. "Watch yourself!" cried Deegan as he took the rise with an agility amazing in one of his years in bulk. In a moment they had passed from the sheltering curtain and were clambering over steeper heights. The rent narrowed as it swept upward and followed the turn of the shallow offshoot, and now they had to grip with hand and foot most precariously. Then, some 20 feet above the summit of the odd, intrusive stratum, the passage dwindled to a mere thread utterly untenable. But luck was now as friendly an ally as before it had been obdurate, and not 10 feet below lay a little plateau. A few feet of flat, smooth rock, the first of the innumerable rungs and semblance of giant steps, which reached to the distant summit. Lithe and silent at once both men dropped, and breathing hard they stood side by side with fierce eyes minutely scanning the neighboring fantastic crags. In 100 spots, amid this chaos of riven, seamed, cluttered rock, hideous death might lurk unseen and almost brushing them. That these horrible things could scale such heights was indisputable, and that very second they might be noiselessly clambering to them amid the jagged surrounding crags. Motionless and tense, the two men listened, but never a whisper broke the deathly silence. Even the melancholy note of the fall was here by some acoustic freak unheard, and the now invisible pit from which they had ascended might well never have existed for all the proof that came to them of its loathsome occupants. These few tense moments of escape had seemingly obliterated the horror that preceded them. Yet the suspense of dread waiting they experienced even more fully the peril of their position. "Vance," said Deegan in a gruff whisper. "This cursed place has got my goat. We've got to get a move on or dark will be on us. And night here." "Dark, night," echoed Vance with a shiver of horror. "Not here. Anything but that. You lead. You're a better man than I am here," he added simply. "Come on," said Deegan, swinging round and making inward, where a steep slide of huge fragments debauched to the little plateau. As he moved, a dark, ragged mass hurtled above Vance, passed indeed so close that the wind of its descent stirred his wide-brimmed headgear, and struck something with a sickening squelch, and there was Deegan staggering and fighting desperately, tearing at long, sinuous tentacles that implacably gripped at the flailing arms, and in a second had bound them with a score of grisly, twining coils, while the thick, raging voice was abruptly quenched and usurped by abominable, inarticulate mumblings and inhuman whisperings. Vance gazed with benumbed horror at a headless trunk, which swayed with grotesque stumbling and pointless motions. From feet to start of the massive chest it was Deegan. Above, coil upon coil of rigid tentacle hid and held his arms, immovable, and a great formless sprawling mass, yellow, oily, wrinkled, completely covered every inch above like a ghastly hood. A hood that with loathsome contractions and undulations was fitting itself as a mask into every contour of shoulders, throat, and head. Vance was no weakling, and never a drop of craven blood coursed through his veins, yet only the stimulus of desperation nerved his muscles to the deed as he hurled himself upon the frightful thing, and with bare hands tore frantically at the tough, viscous cables. Not by a fraction of an inch could his fiercest efforts loose their steel embrace, but from the smooth and oily lengths his fingers slid impotently away. Indeed, so tremendous was their contractile strength that the coils were almost buried in the victim's body, and in many places the sole evidence of their existence were the swollen ridges on each side. Instantly, Vance realized that the ghastly pressure of those frightful coils must have expelled the breath from Deegan's lungs, even as the impervious hood was closing hermetically upon him. Assuredly, this creature was the most horrible engine of death the world had yet engendered. It was appalling beyond imagination, and the horror of the thing reached its culmination in the utter soundlessness of the killing. Coldly, implacably, noiselessly, the brute was strangling its victim, and never a whisper of his death agony now pierced the deadly hood. Only the jarring clash of rock, and Deegan's iron-shod boots broke the shroud of silence which encompassed them. There was no time to search for a weapon such as Deegan found to hand on the rubble below. Around lay naught but clean-swept, unbroken surfaces. Farther on, a rock-slide debouched upon the little plateau where doubtless search would discover some crude weapon, but meanwhile the precious seconds spilled the sands of ebbing life. Madness, a vast, overwhelming, volcanic rage swept upon him. With a hoarse scream of insane wrath and hate, he leapt straight at his partner and bore him crashing to the smooth floor, and without a second's pause, thrust his face savagely into the heavy, viscous folds where the hood had contracted in the depression below its victim's jaw. The lance-pointed, horny mandibles opened wide and snapped fiercely with a slick as the brute writhed violently to meet this unexpected attack. But the strong jaws and teeth of the attacker were buried deep in the glutinous thing and held with bulldog grip, yet never a tentacle released his frightful grasp. Worrying the thing like a starving wolf, by main force he tore loose a strip of the foul stuff, a strip which came away in long, clinging, ragged strands which stretched with rubber-like elasticity and parted, recoiling to his face in sticky tenacity. In a flash, his teeth had closed again deep in the gaping wound. For the moment he was an elemental caveman, born of ancestors barely emerged from inarticulate bestiality, who craved to tear his foe in shreds with the only weapons nature had given him. Now, whipping tentacles assaulted him, strove with vicious might to enwrap him in their grasp. But the greater number still gripped tight their prey, and every second the strong white teeth were tearing, burrowing, rending silently deeper and deeper into the clammy slime and glutinous stringiness. Foul clots of greasy filth and gushes of heavy, stinking liquid filled his nostrils, eyes, and mouth. Yet the brain of the caveman was wide awake, and a savage triumph pulsed through it, as with terrific force he hurled assailant and victim crashing against the wall from which they had dropped, at the same second by a mighty heave twirling the living missile so that the full force of the impact was taken by the central globular mass. With a vile squelch, the thing burst asunder into a dozen ragged segments, and a shower of warm, greasy slime spattered his face and hung in clots and a drapery of adhesive, sluggish, dripping entrails. At once the binding tentacles lost their rigidity. In a flash he was tearing them apart, heedless of their savage death throes. One supreme effort and he had wrenched the thing from its anchorage, swung it on high, and whirled it crashing many feet away, where with convulsive flailings it lay, an indescribably hideous sight. In terror he gazed at the silent figure of Deegan. The thought that after all death might be the victor and he be left solitary in that frightful wilderness was a thought too appalling to endure. It came to him that the rough, unlettered Deegan was indeed a tower of strength and security. And in that moment the scales of prejudice and petty class distinction dropped forever from his inner vision. But as he meant to listen for the beat of that staunch heart, Deegan's eyelids trembled, then slowly opened. In a flash, Vance had loosed his partner's throat band, and using his hat he fanned gusts of reviving air upon him. As the massive chest drank ever deeper of the craved elixir, soon life flamed up again, unimpaired. Weakly he raised his head, and at once his gaze was rooted in horror on the mangled, palpitating thing that had so nearly wrought his destruction. "That thing, it fell on me," he muttered hoarsely. "That thing," he repeated dully as though stupefied by horror. "It strangled me, and I was helpless in that awful choking darkness. Oh my God!" "I know. A nightmare of hell," said Vance, and his voice shook. "But Deegan, we've got to get through right away. Dark will be on us soon. That crowd down there will scent us for sure if we stay here. I reckon this brute was just an odd loafer hanging around. Anyway, we can't stop here," he urged impatiently, for Deegan, though evidently greatly recovered, still remained motionless, staring like one hypnotized by the squirming of the loathsome thing. Then suddenly he became aware that Vance was watching him. "All right, give him a chance to get his wind back," he growled sullenly. "But you're right, it is near sundown," he added, rising quickly to his feet with such obvious agitation that it was plain the mere thought of approaching night had aroused in him an almost frenzied terror. "All right, this looks as good a chance as any other," said Vance shortly. And now his voice was cool and firm as he swung into the lead, while Deegan, closely following, did not notice the order of their going. End of Part 6.